Hey guys, Dan here. Today we're going to have a look at one of the most anticipated wheels, the VRS DFP Formula Wheel. So as always, disclaimer first, we have two this time. First of all, this wheel was sent to me by VRS for this review, but of course they don't get to see the review. They have no impact on the script and all the opinions are my own. And the second thing is, if you didn't know, I actually work for GSI, which is basically a competitor of VRS. But for the YouTube channel, I always try to be 100% objective. Of course, that's not always possible, but I'm trying to give you my opinion in the best way that I can. So we'll start with the price, because that's probably what most people are interested in. And this wheel actually is 997 euros or dollars, including taxes, which probably will surprise many. To spoiler you right away, I absolutely think the wheel is worth the price, but I also think that probably most people expected it to be cheaper, mainly because VRS gear has always been insanely competitively priced in the past. So yeah, first impression, you get this fancy looking box. The first time a VRS product actually comes in a nice box, so that is pretty cool. It's also made in the Netherlands, it says it here on the back of the box, and yeah, gives a nice first impression when you receive the box. I expected the typical brown box that most VRS products typically ship, but that was a pleasant surprise. And also when you take the wheel out of the box, the first impression is very positive. It looks very solid. I think it has a very minimalistic, classy looking design, and it definitely, at least in my opinion, gives you the Usher F64 vibe here. I mean, if we look at both wheels, you probably understand why I get this impression, especially V2 without the thumb rotaries. It is similar, both in number of buttons, number of inputs, how the grips feel, but we'll talk about all that. I'll give you the basic specs first, and then we'll have a look into everything in detail. You do have a 5mm aluminum front, sandblasted, looks very nice, and you have a plastic back in the rear. The wheel is relatively compact at 285mm of diameter. On the front you also have 14 push buttons, 2 funky switches in the perfect position, 2 Greyhill rotary switches, and also 3 encoders. I think the encoders are Burns, but we'll have a look at the electronics in a moment. On the back, nothing surprising, we have 2 shifters, 2 clutches, they feel good. Then we see a little connector here. The wheel can actually be connected via USB or via Bluetooth. You can choose whatever suits you best. And the weight of the wheel is 1,279 grams without the quick release. Also nice detail. I made fun of VRS when I first saw the pictures, but it comes with black screws now, not these silver Phillips screws or whatever I saw in the first pictures. So these are nice looking screws and definitely suit the design. But yeah, we'll start at the back. We'll have a look at the shifters first, because that's probably the button, however you want to call it, that you will use the most. These are pretty standard shifters, and I don't mean that in any bad way. They do have a tiny bit of play, but nothing that really is distracting. I've definitely seen much worse. I've seen a few that are a little bit better, but not many. Then you have a screw here where you can adjust the travel of the shifter, or throw, how do you call that? Let me know in the comments down below. But I left it in the standard position, which gives you a travel of about 7mm on the shifter. And something that I'm introducing now, starting with this review, I actually bought a force measuring device. Wait, let me show you. Looks like this. It's not the most fancy one in the world, but I thought for reviews, it's always so hard to describe how hard the shifter is to push or how hard buttons are to push. So from now on, I will just give you the values that I measured. It might not be the exact absolute accuracy, but it will definitely be comparable between all my reviews from now on. So I measured the shifters at 8.5 Newton of force needed to push it down, which is in the midfield of all the shifters that I've tried. And yeah, overall, shifters feel nice. They are not silent, but they are also not super loud, so also pretty much in the midfield regarding that. Definitely not distracting. I mean, you hear it here when I don't have any noise gate on the microphone. There are definitely louder shifters, there are definitely quieter shifters. The switch itself is actually not a switch, it's a hall sensor that measures the position of the pedal arm, and then in the software you can configure where the shifting point actually is. It's done really clever because the magnet is on the shifter, but the sensor's on the PCB. I'll show you that later. The advantage of a design like this is there's no wear. A Hall sensor just measures the magnetic field, whereas a switch can wear and will wear. But yeah, as you can probably tell, good shifters, nothing spectacular, and that's a good thing. Moving down to the clutches, same thing. We have this little screw here that lets you adjust the overall travel or throw of the clutch pedal. In the stock configuration, you get about 2 centimeters of travel. I mean, this is hard to measure, so it's just a very rough value. Then also there's a tiny bit of play, absolutely fine. comparable to most clutches. And the bite point for the clutches is of course adjustable. You can also use it for throttle and brake, for example. There are two modes how to adjust the clutch bite point. Either you hold both funky switches and then you can adjust it. Unfortunately, at the time of filming the review, the manual has not been available yet. So I haven't tried the on-device setting for the clutches. I imagine it's a little bit hard because there are no visual indicators on this wheel, no LEDs or something. But you can also just do it in the software like on most other wheels. The USB cable that comes with it, the connector is really, really small. But the connection itself is very solid. I would not expect any issues with this. I mean, this was designed by VRS. VRS is very closely affiliated with Coanda. All their esports drivers use these wheels. If there were any issues with this, you wouldn't see people racing in the highest esports leagues using this. And alternatively, you can also just use this to charge the wheel. There's actually a battery in there. And you can also just use it via Bluetooth. Bluetooth wireless sounds scary, but no. Wireless connections are very reliable. I tried this, even though VRS said the firmware is not finished yet and there might be some instabilities with wireless. I've had zero issues with it, but in the long run, wireless will probably be more reliable than cables. And then the back, also, like I said before, is actually plastic, but it's a very, very nice looking plastic, and it definitely helps with the weight of the wheel. It's a very lightweight wheel. There's definitely zero flex on this wheel. I have tested some wheels where the grips will flex more because they are actually molded onto the carbon fiber, even though there's an aluminum back. I think to save some money and weight, a plastic back is an absolutely viable option here. This wheel is absolutely solid, but if it would introduce some flex, I think you feel the benefit of less weight more than you feel the disadvantage some flex would give to you. Does that make sense? I think it's a very reasonable choice to go with a plastic back here. One thing I do not like, if you look at the wheel from this perspective, do you see how the quick release slightly protrudes on top? I don't know, it's not really bad, but it doesn't look so pretty while using. But anyways, let's move on to the front. And here we have 3 encoders, regular incremental encoders. I think they are actually burns. They feel like burns. The resistance feels like burns. I measured these at around 1.95 Newton centimeters of rotational force needed to turn them. I also have a push button. And one thing that maybe can be improved in future firmware that I discovered, if you turn them really, really quick, they sometimes trigger a wrong input, but that's all just timing and can be fine-tuned in firmware. Then what I did not expect to find on this wheel, we actually have 2 Greyhill rotary switches. These are really expensive premium switches that cost around 15 euros. And they are very nice, for example, to set your traction control or ABS, because the difference between an encoder and a rotary switch is the encoder just tells the game whether you turn it clockwise or counterclockwise, whereas a rotary switch always knows the position it's in. So if you set it to like 5, for example, the game always knows the switch is in position 5. If you turn it really quickly to position 11, it tells the position of the switch to the game and not the increments. But you can also, if you don't want to use it like this, you can set these in software to behave like an encoder. You can make every switch behave like an encoder. You cannot make an encoder behave like a switch. Talking about switch, there's no push button on these. The resistance of these switches is very nice. I measured it at 5.4 Newton centimeters. But to be honest, it's a much bigger number, but due to the fact that the knob is bigger, it doesn't even feel that different to the encoders with a small knob. Then we have 2 funky switches in the perfect position next to your thumbs here. Easy to reach. I know I just said it's the perfect position. I think it's the perfect position for most sim racers. That's what I gathered from feedback from people. In my opinion, funky switch position is better in the middle because then you don't have so much force feedback going on when you're trying to operate it. All right, then on the front, we also have 14 buttons. These button caps are actually aluminum. They feel very nice. You have 4 buttons with a little guard around it. I don't know why, to be honest. It doesn't really feel different than the other ones. And the buttons itself do have a slight bit of play in here, but it's just, it's not rattling or something when the force feedback is going crazy. It's just something that I noticed. And internally, they are surface-mounted switches with an insanely high activation force. I measured these to be at about 6.5 Newton, which is close to an Otto P9 that I measured at 7.5, for example. These are probably the best surface-mounted push buttons that I have ever seen on any wheel. Really nice and tactile feel here. All right, let's talk about the stickers. Well, there are no stickers. Ergonomics next. So we have rubber grips, and to quote the VRS website, they are rubber grips of optimized hardness. yeah, whatever that means, what I can tell you is they feel good. Whether you use gloves or no gloves, they are crazy grippy. You don't have to use gloves with this wheel. But one thing that I discovered is there's not a lot of space for your hands. My hands are glove size L and I struggle a little bit with the positioning of my fingers on this wheel. Like typically, you really gotta be careful with your wording here. Typically, I have 3 fingers in the bottom cutout here, and in this wheel it definitely does not fit. So I just readjusted and I grabbed the wheel like this now. 2 fingers in the bottom part of the wheel and then use 2 fingers on the shifter. It really depends on how you hold the wheel. After adjustment, it's fine for me, but still for my hands, there are more comfortable wheels to hold. To give you an idea, the spacing here on the narrowest part is about 41 to 42 millimeters. And the circumference of the grip, it's a medium-sized grip, I would say, is 111 millimeters. Then on the top, the narrowest part is round about 36 millimeter and the circumference is 102 millimeter. No issue here, just the bottom cutout that doesn't really work too well with how I typically hold wheel. But the grips are actually removable, so maybe there will be some slightly bigger grips in the future. As you can see in the back here, there's 3 screws. If you remove these, you have the grip in your hands. VRS said in the future there might be different size grips available to buy. So yeah, overall 285 millimeters. If you like that, it's a great wheel. My sweet spot is at about 295 to 300 millimeters for a wheel, but I still felt comfortable using the wheel. Okay, so the software also looks a little bit like Usher. You have profiles here on top that you can create for different cars. So for example, I made a profile for GT3 with a different bite point. But we'll go through all the options we have here. Let's quickly set the rotary to the rotary mode. And then you can also see what I talked about earlier. See, when I turn this, you will see the inputs going from 1 to 12. Yeah. And then the other one from 13 to 24. There's also 2 axes for the clutches. We are in the dual clutch mode. If we go to the throttle and brake mode, you can see we have 2 bars. Calibration, I'm not going to redo it, but you can calibrate the clutches and the shifters here by just pushing them to the minimum and maximum values. Then you have dead zones for both clutches that you can configure here. Let's go back to the dual clutch mode. Master clutch will configure which clutch goes from 0 to 100 and the other one from 0 to the bite point. Then the bite point is adjustable with a slider here in 0.1 increments. Then for the shifters, you have 2 settings, the attack point and the hysteresis. Attack point is pretty much at what position the shifter will send the engaged signal. And hysteresis is like how big the area is. Think of it like that. You need to push the shifter to 30%, then it will go to on. And hysteresis means it needs to go below 20% to go to off. This is to avoid that the point in between the 2 positions will flicker like crazy or something. 0 issues with the shifters, very good. And then you can configure the rotaries to either be an encoder. See, now it will just send a short pulse instead of the position. You can set it to be the rotary switch or the rotary pulse, which is the same thing, only that it will send a short impulse for each position. Advantage could be, for example, you set it to TC1, TC2, but you actually have no idea what your setup is set to. Then go to rotary pulsed. If you load the setup, it will stay at the settings it is, rather than overwriting the setup settings with the position of the switches. And I guess there are games that only work with rotary pulsed, but at least on iRacing and ACC, you can use the regular rotary mode. Then encoder pulse width. It depends on the game what the best setting is for this. That is the time for how long the encoder will send the button to be engaged when you turn it. But the ideal setting here, 30 works pretty well for iRacing and ACC, but play around with the setting if in your game it does not register all the inputs, for example. And then last setting, LED brightness. There's one LED that signals the Bluetooth connection status, I think. There's probably also like a warning when the battery is low. But like I said, unfortunately, I do not have the manual, so I don't really know what that is all about. But yeah, I think we will have a quick look at the inside next. For that, we will remove the quick release first. Do I have to remove the quick release? Yeah, we'll have to remove the quick release and all the encoder and funky switch knobs. but I guess I will just fast forward that till we are there. Okay, 4 screws and the button caps and the quick release. And then 6 screws and the button cap and the quick release, and then you can open the wheel. And you gotta be a bit careful because these buttons will fall out. You can see the aluminum caps here very nicely. It's just some piece of aluminum, anodized. Looks nice, feels good. Also some foamy insert in the for the battery. And here you can also see the buttons falling out. And here you can also see these little holes for the grips. But yeah, this is not the interesting part. We want to have a look at the electronics. And something that I took it apart before I removed the PCB. I'm not going to do it again. But there's something very clever going on with the clutches and the shifters. It's just a single magnet, and then you have these little Hall sensors here on top. Like here you see this is the one for the shifter, and then on the bottom this is the one for the clutch. And that way there's no cable or anything going from the shifter or the clutch to the PCB. Very clever solution. I think Azatec is doing the same, and the Leo X F1 wheel is doing the same. We have a standard Analoop AA battery here, easy to replace if it should ever like break. And then, I mean, I cannot tell you with certainty, but these look like Burns encoders to me. I should know because we use them in GSI wheels as well, in some of them. STM32 processor, and then on the bottom we have that Bluetooth chip that communicates to the PC, and the Greyhill rotaries in the middle. And here we have these Alps push buttons. They are really nice, 7 Newton. I looked the part up, there's even a 10 Newton version. And yeah, the shifters and the clutches are also connected to the plastic housing, but there's no flex or anything going on. And this is a very clean design. Enormous USB traces here. I wonder if this is actually a 2-layer board. Wouldn't really make too much sense, but who knows? That's because of the impedance profile of the PCB. You always want USB to be at 90 ohms, and typically 2-layer boards require these huge traces. But yeah, very, very clean on the internals. And I would say we'll put it back together. Oh, before I forget, these button guards here, they come off. They are plastic, but it's the same material as the backside. They feel good, and this is so light. I totally understand why VRS went with this approach. It's probably not to save a lot of money. It's probably to save a lot of weight on the wheel. But yeah, let's put it back together. All right, here we go. One thing I noticed while taking it apart, if you look at this, this says made in Germany. Make up your mind, either Netherlands or Germany, but it appears to be made in Europe, so I think that also explains the price a little bit. You can probably make this a lot cheaper if it's made in China, but this appears to be made in Europe. The verdict, it's a very good steering wheel. If you don't want a huge steering wheel, 285 is on the smaller side. I know a lot of esport pros prefer the smaller wheels, but that's just personal preference. If you have very, very big hands, I probably would look at another wheel, to be honest. But for the average hand, I mean, I'm glove size L and it has been fine with some readjustments. This should be fine. I've had 0 issues during use. To be fair, I've only received the wheel last week, so not as long testing as I typically do with most of my reviews. But I think for a steering wheel, it's different than pedals, the way you really need to feel it over a few weeks. With wheels, I think it's fine to test those over a few days. Considering it's made in Europe and all the features, I think the price is fine. I do think that most people will be surprised that it is close to 1,000 euros, but that's not because of the quality of the wheel. That is more because of the history of VRS pricing in terms of price, performance and everything. This is a good wheel. It's not a crazy price performance king like most of the other VRS gear, but it's definitely fairly priced. The biggest competition, in my opinion, is the Usher F64. I only have the V2 here, but V2, V3, very similar, and the Grid MPX, because they are all similarly priced. Compared to the Usher, I think we have kind of similar aesthetics with a black front. I do prefer the look of the VRS with the sand-blasted aluminum compared to the more shiny aluminum of the Usher. Shiny and dusty, I should use it more. Shifter and clutch is very comparable between the two. The buttons, in my opinion, are better on the VRS. They feel a bit more clicky. The Usher has this rubber thing going on internally that makes the button feel a little bit more muddy. I don't know. Still good buttons. The rotary switches on the Usher are actually slightly harder to turn. Even though these are gray hills, I think these are even stiffer. If that's a good thing or a bad thing, that is absolutely personal preference. And I do prefer the ergonomics of the Usher though, because it has a little bit more space in the bottom cutout. But yeah, I think this is probably the wheel that comes the closest to the DFP Formula Wheel. Another contender would be the Grid MPX. The review for that should be on the channel next week. It is a little bit fancier. It is more expensive by around 200 euros. For that, you do get LED lights. Not that that is really expensive to make, but it's a nice feature. It looks cool on the rig. The front buttons on the Grid are okay, but probably the weakest out of these three wheels. But they are still more than good enough. The clutch is probably the best from these three wheels, but the shifters are the weakest, but we'll talk about that in the review. Then the grips on the Grid are thinner, but you have way more space for your fingers. If you hold it like this, no problem. You do get 2 extra buttons in the rear, but you have funky switches in a bad position. Ergonomically, this is my favorite wheel out of the 3. And I don't have it here, but I think the Cube Controls F Core also is a nice contender in this series. The cheapest of all these, with similar features. I should have one incoming, and I will post a review of that on the channel as well. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to not miss those. So yeah, overall, it's an absolutely great steering wheel. It reminds me a lot of the Usher F64, but that's not a bad thing. I do wish it had some side rotaries, even though I have no idea where or how to fit these on this wheel. But side rotaries are actually something that I really like now that I have some wheels with it. For me, probably the same as for you. The price was a little bit surprising, but like I said, I think the price is fair considering the quality you're getting here. If you like how the wheel looks and if it checks all your boxes in terms of specs, I can highly recommend it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to join the Discord and ask there, or just leave a YouTube comment. But thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye bye.